My name is Kimberly Goycochea. I'm currently running on the Fix It Now slate, and I'm running to bring the student voice to the Board of Education and also to bring the student experience because I was a product of the Jersey City Public Schools, and we both are, and we want to bring our experiences to the Board of Ed so that our vision can be clearer and our policies can be made with the best intentions for both students and parents of Jersey City.
My name's Mussab. I'm running as part of the Fix It Now team with Kimberly Goycochea. The reason I'm running is to also be that liaison for the students, but also to give back to this community that raised me and sent me off to college. I think the biggest issues for the election in general are Dr. Lyles. For some reason, people want to know if you're pro or anti Dr. Lyles. That's been a big issue, and I think the second big issue has just been the political sphere in Jersey City. With Fulop running for governor and then dropping out, and all the different things that have been happening in the city. I think those two things have been very politically charged, and those two things have been affecting the campaign.
I think from my experience going around talking to people in Jersey City, the two main issues that have come up to me are, for example, the condition of the schools and the communication the board has with the schools and its students. A lot of students have said that they go to the board meetings. I know several from my alum, Snyder, who go to the board meetings and they feel as though their voices aren't heard. And the second big issue is wondering where the teams stand on certain very controversial issues, such as charter schools, for example. And yet that's what I find that people talk to me about most. It's really interesting to say from experience that there have been both good things and bad things. I wouldn't necessarily be able to say if I wanted her to continue, only because I don't know what goes on during those closed door meetings. And there's a lot of stuff that isn't very out to the public. That's something that I would like to figure out as if I were to be elected, so that I could give the true vision, if I wanted her to stay or not, and what policies we would discuss.
I think that, it's Dr. Lyles' tenure is not something you can paint with broad strokes. There are things that I really like that she did. For instance, SAT classes as well as the SAT test for seniors, which was free. But then there's some other things that I don't really necessarily agree with, such as Innovation High School. So the other thing, as Kimberly was saying, we don't know what happens in these closed session meetings. There's a lot of rumors about board members bullying her, a lot of disrespect that's going on behind those closed doors. And until we get there, we can't give a firm answer of how we feel about her continuing or not. I think the biggest thing is there are a lot of grumblings from students at Snyder who feel disenfranchised. They feel like they're not getting their fair shake because the students from Innovation are getting to go to NJCU and have certain classes. And there's the other big thing is that a lot of times the students don't actually interact, which is why you'll notice that there isn't too many issues that are brought up. But when the students do interact, a lot of students tell me there are tensions and there is a sense of disenfranchisement.
Like Mussab was saying earlier, there is a big sense of tension in the room, so to speak, between Innovation and Snyder. And I believe that is because, number one, of the opportunities that Innovation has been able to have compared to Snyder's history. And Innovation is a good school. There's plenty of opportunities there, but it's having it in the same building as Snyder is sort of having a tale of two cities, so to speak. And because of that, Snyder students not only feel, in a sense, betrayed because they're looking to the board and they're looking for these higher-ups to help them by listening to what they feel, because they're very active. I can tell you this for sure, in what they want to fix their school. They only want the best for their education, of course. And to have Innovation there is sort of saying, we don't want to fix your school. We would rather have Innovation as sort of a Band-Aid. And I feel like that's very, for the Snyder students, it would seem very disrespectful to them. What I would have to say about the dialogue concerning charter schools is that it's very divisive. You either are pro-charter or anti-charter. That being said, I tend to like the first thing that a board member has to think about is the public schools, how they're managed, how the students are, and their welfare and education. And by focusing a lot on charter schools, it sort of says that the public schools aren't a priority, especially because a lot of students now are leaving to charter schools because they feel as though public schools aren't the right choice for them, which that is up to them. But what's really, I would say, important for all board members is to put public schools first, is to put the public school funding first, education first, welfare first, and have those students feel that I would say that they're not very disadvantaged, because a lot of students and parents, while on the campaign trail, have said that they feel disadvantaged because the charter schools get a lot more funding, so to speak, and they have that different air around them where the children feel respected as compared to the public schools.
So with regards to the whole charter public school dilemma, I mean, charter schools don't get as much money as public schools, but I think the bigger question is, how are we treating the kids who go to public schools? So we're not against charter schools, right? We're not in this pro or anti debate. We're somewhere in the middle, because we're not completely against charter schools, but we don't feel like there should be that many popping up where the schools can open, take money, and then close down, where there's just money lost from all the kids. That being said, I don't think that there should be a moratorium to close all charter schools. However, I still think that public schools should be a priority, because we're able to examine the budget more in more detail, and we know exactly where the money's going, and that the public schools should be the first priority of all board members. So I think the biggest thing that you'd end up having to cut up on is student activities, which is the unfortunate part. I think what's more important to think about is how we would make up for those lost funds. I think it's very important that we have public-private partnerships. For instance, developers who are building here, they should be giving towards the schools, especially if they're getting tax abatements. And I think we should look more towards those sort of alternate ways of getting these sort of funds, so that the students wouldn't have to lose those activities. But besides some administrative costs, the larger portion that would be lost would be student activities.
Student activities would most likely be lost, and that includes student organizations, which I find, talking to a lot of the students, is a great part of their day. It's a very active part in which they like to partake in, for example. And that goes for all schools, which is very unfortunate to be lost. But what I'm really concerned about is, first of all, our budget right now is $673 million. What I'm concerned about is how we have so much money, but we're not using it effectively. And it's going to be even worse if we lose that 15 or 20%. If we do, that's even more concerning. Well, our budget will still be incredibly high, in my opinion. It still probably won't be used effectively. And we have to take into account that every dollar is going to a child's education, and it's not something to be taken lightly. So while, yes, I'm very concerned about losing student activities, I feel that if both me and Mussab are elected, we will try to use that budget effectively so that it will not be a huge loss, because that is a vital and critical part of a student's day.
It's, last year the previous contract negotiation was a big deal. They were going back and forth for more than a year, discussing what was happening between teachers. And eventually, there had to be a third-party negotiator who came in. So I think it is important that we have a third-party negotiator, especially given how politically charged the board is, given the teachers union does give endorsements, and at this point does have the majority control over the board. So I think it is important to have a third-party negotiator to help make sure that the contract is fair. However, when it comes to things like teacher tenure or some people say paying based upon merit, I don't think that's something that we should be going towards. Like, if students' test scores aren't good, that's not necessarily an indicator of how well a teacher is teaching. But what I do think is something that we should implement into how a teacher is evaluated is student opinions and student questionnaires. So I think that at the end of each year, there should be evaluations done by students, and not to say that they would be a very large part of a teacher's evaluation, but I think that they should play some role, because it's one thing when a principal is doing an evaluation or a board member is coming in to see a teacher, but it's another thing to see how the teacher is performing every single day. So I think that's something that would be important to let the students know that their voices matter. Obviously, it'd be something that would be blind, so it'd be anonymous. But I think it's something that'd be important for teacher evaluations.
Party negotiator is critical, because there are going to be disagreements, and unfortunately there are going to be people who are going to probably stonewall maybe us or another sect of the board, if you will. And for our teachers, that's only more anxiety for them. They need these contracts. I know a couple of teachers from this city and from other cities as well, and it gives them much anxiety when those contracts are not negotiated. It's not something that it's just you take lightly, especially if you know a teacher or are a teacher. So that's what I feel should be really addressed on the board, having a third-party negotiator, having student evaluations, and also being as a board member who the students can talk to. I know as myself, when a board member comes, the students sit up straighter, the teachers act very differently, and that's something that shouldn't be happening. A student should be able to come to me if I were a board trustee and say, hey, this is what's happening, how long it's been happening, and I should be able to trust that voice and be able to use it. I think the amount of testing that we have right now on our students is very detrimental to them. There is too much testing, to be frank, and a lot of it is taking away from class time that could be used to get a whole-rounded education. That being said, it's also very detrimental to the teachers to be evaluated on testing. I could say for myself and many other students that I am not the most perfect testing student in the world, and that's not something that should evaluate a student's knowledge. Because it is so well-rounded, it's not flat that we all take a test, we get a grade, that grade determines our future, or that grade determines what college we go to and how that influences our success, so to speak. So I feel like that's also very detrimental to the teachers, because for them, there might be teachers who are doing excellent jobs, and I know several of them who do, and there's just students with testing anxiety and issues with testing that they can't succeed even though they are learning from those teachers. So it's very ineffective, and I think that should be put to an end as soon as possible.
I think when it comes to testing, we're definitely over-testing kids too much. And then when talking about evaluations and teacher evaluations, the biggest thing to look at is the achievement gap, which is well documented. Income plays a very big factor in how students test. And this is something that, it's going to be a huge problem in some neighborhoods as opposed to other neighborhoods, where some kids are going to test less because of the income of their households, because of what's been studied in the achievement gap. That's not to say that the student can't be just as successful as other students, but the fact of the matter is, because of this gap, because of the extra factors that they're going to face, they just won't be able to test as well. And that shouldn't be an indicator of their potential, and it definitely should not be an indicator of how well teachers are teaching. As unfortunate as it is, there are bad teachers in Jersey City public schools. And I think the biggest thing about it is that it's such a taboo topic that students will talk to each other about it. And, they'll say like, oh, avoid that teacher or whatever you can do to not get this teacher. But then no one actually does anything about it from an administrative point of view. And that's what I think the student questionnaires are so important, because if it is anonymous and it truly works as it's supposed to, you can kind of start to identify trends year over year where a teacher is constantly getting negative evaluations from students, where they might be excellent when principals or administrators come in, but the students who see it in the classroom, they'll actually be able to identify year over year that, this particular person has been a problem and detrimental to the learning process.
Student evaluations are something that not only we should have based on how the teacher necessarily teaches, because, for example, a teacher might teach perfectly, but they may not be able to connect with that certain student group. And there are, of course, good teachers and bad teachers, and maybe there are others who don't know their demographic, and they're, I guess, somewhere in the middle, and that's something that we also need to address, because being able to connect with Jersey City students, a lot of whom are disadvantaged, a lot of whom live in low-income families who have these circumstances that can disturb their potential, need a connection with an adult and to feel welcome and understood in their school in order to feel, I guess, able to do anything, so to speak. And that's something that not is always addressed. So yes, we do need to address bad teachers with those questionnaires, with student opinions, and by being a open board, so to speak, to that student voice. But we also need to bridge that gap and also have that connection to the demographic in order for students to feel safe and welcome and feel like learning is a good thing instead of just being pushed into school because they have to. For people who say I'm too young, I would encourage them to look at our platform, to look at what we stand for, what our solutions are, and not just us, the entire candidates. Because if I want someone to not vote for me, I would want them to not vote for me because they don't agree with my issues, not because they feel that my age is something that is going to affect the board. In fact, I feel my age is an advantage because I have just left the Jersey City public school system. I have seen everything firsthand in the most authentic way possible. And instead of just leaving and abandoning my community, I choose to help it and to use my advantage to help these students so that they don't have to suffer the same struggles I do to get to where I am.
The biggest thing that I have to say is that, we always talk about the parents and teachers and taxpayers as stakeholders of education, but it seems that the students are somehow forgotten. And the students, they're the largest stakeholders of education because what happens directly impacts them. And Kimberly and I have went through the system, and we know most directly how these policies trickle down into our classrooms. We know what happens in the classroom when certain things happen in the Board of Education. And so we are coming to give back to this community. We don't want to abandon a lot of the other kids, and we want to be there for them and be the liaison so that they have their voice and they know that someone is always going to be fighting for them as stakeholders in the Board of Education.